And so if you are sick and tired of being sick and tired of looking for flourishing in your own strength, in this marketplace of ideas that's been undermined by this battlefield of ideals, and you feel lost, you feel like you're in orbit out there as well, God is saying to you, if you come back to me, you open your heart and open your mind to me, I want to be with you and offer you all of these things that your heart has been desiring. Well, my wife, Fiona, and I, we're really blessed and fortunate. We have two children, Zach, who's 2 years old, and Ariel, who's 4 months old. And a lot of people ask us, since Ariel was born in June this year, why'd you call her Ariel? That's kind of an interesting name. And there's a few reasons. The least significant, but still an interesting one, is, of course, because of Disney's The Little Mermaid. But Ariel's actually a Hebrew word, as some of you might know. Ariel means a couple of different things in Hebrew, and one of the things it means is Jerusalem. You don't hear that very often, but Ariel means Jerusalem. When I used to work in politics as a political advisor, me and some friends of mine, we used to use this poem, William Blake's Jerusalem. We used to use it for motivation in politics. And it's this old English poem, and it almost became an unofficial kind of national anthem of England for a while. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, until we build Jerusalem. It's a beautiful poem that really talks about human flourishing and building better societies, building better lives, working together, looking to hope for something better and something greater than where we are. But Blake is not naive. He still talks about the darkness and the struggles that need to be overcome, but he says, still, we are all called to build Jerusalem. And so he writes, and was Jerusalem builded here, among these dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear, O clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire. We will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword rest in my hand until we build Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. And so he's writing obviously about England. And there's some other strange stuff in the poem. There's some myth and there's some legend, but it's quite an inspiring and a beautiful piece of poetry that we used to use all the time. And when we look down through the history of humankind, we see that people are always seeking some version of Jerusalem. People are looking for their flourishing in some way. They're looking for fulfillment. They're looking for flourishing. And one of the things that has helped us along, and when we look through human history, we've gone up and down, and we've achieved and we've failed, and we continue to go around in circles in many ways. But one thing that is always kind of constant in humankind's search for flourishing is an accompanying marketplace of ideas. An accompanying marketplace of ideas, a virtual place where we can share civilly and graciously and even disagree civilly and graciously about different concepts, to innovate, to think through what might be the best way to build Jerusalem and work out how we can do that in the most effective way. Now, the challenge we have all had in the last little while, probably in this last generation, is that this marketplace of ideas has been undermined by a new battlefield of ideals. The marketplace of ideas is being destabilized by a battlefield of ideals. And for the first time in a long time, in this kind of postmodern, post-truth, secularizing world, the ideals on which we seek to build Jerusalem are for the first time in need of being redefined. They're up for grabs now. They're no longer widely accepted. Concepts like truth and justice that we used to just accept the need for and accept the meaning of are now up for grabs. There's no certainty anymore because the world is telling us that it is actually up to each of us as individuals to define those ideals for ourselves and then to go and find them, to go and build our own Jerusalem in our own strength. And so this poses a huge challenge for this generation of people, no matter who we are, no matter what we believe, no matter why we are here. This marketplace of ideas, this battlefield of ideals, means that building Jerusalem is really up to us. And yet the interesting thing is that these ideals pour out of every human heart in very, very similar ways, no matter what we believe, no matter who we say we are. Concepts like justice and love and happiness and fulfillment and flourishing, these are all needs of every human heart. And so I just want to talk to you this morning about 3 of these ideals and what we are actually called to do, what we actually need to do to rediscover these ideals in the marketplace of ideas. And I want to talk about our need, individually and collectively as people, to rehumanize the concept of justice, to reorient the concept of love, and to reinvigorate the concept of happiness. Rehumanize justice, reorient love, and reinvigorate happiness. So rehumanizing justice, what does that actually look like? Well, the professor Michael Sandel from Harvard University, a professor of philosophy, he helpfully filters down all of the different approaches to building just societies, to building Jerusalems in the context of justice, into 3 categories. And it's a bit overly simplistic, and he concedes that, but I think it's still helpful. And so the first category, he says, of building just society are the utilitarians. He talks about Jeremy Bentham and his friends, people who say building Jerusalem in the context of justice is really about optimizing happiness and utility. The maximum amount of happiness, or the maximum amount of pleasure, and the minimum amount of pain. Justice is all about utility. That's what Jerusalem will look like. The second category of thinkers are really probably the most influential category, and these are the freedom justice thinkers. They say understanding justice and building just societies is about optimizing freedom. Sure, utility is important, but it's more about freedom. And this is people like Immanuel Kant and John Locke and John Rawls and all these guys. Right? So they say it's about freedom. The third category that Sandel identifies are the telos, or the purpose justice thinkers. And that starts all the way back with Aristotle, who says it's really about purpose. Building Jerusalem is about finding out what people were made for, and then building societies that optimize the capacity for them to achieve those purposes. Right? So we've got 3 pretty good sounding things. None of these 3 things are intrinsically a problem. They're all pretty good. Utility is a good thing. Optimizing pleasure, that seems sensible. Freedom is a good thing. Optimizing that seems sensible. And purpose seems to be a good thing too. But the problem, of course, in a post-truth world where we are being told to think with our feelings, is that each of these 3 things have no objective frame of reference. More and more we struggle out there, and we struggle in here, to understand what justice actually means, what love actually means, what all of these sorts of things actually mean. So in the context of trying to build just societies and understand and build Jerusalem towards justice, we're kind of untethered. And in an untethered place, what ends up happening is that the most powerful people, it's their definitions of justice that win. One of the most popular streamed Netflix shows has been a drama called What If, starring Renee Zellweger. And she's this multi-billionaire protagonist in the show. And she's also very manipulative, socially manipulative, economically manipulative, cold-hearted, operates with her own set of morals and assumptions. And there's an interesting quote during the show where she says, "Do you know what I hate the most? The uninvited moral ideas of lesser people." You know what I hate the most? The uninvited moral ideas of lesser people. On some level, having worked in politics, I know exactly what she means. But this is the problem. This is the problem with a world where we don't have an objective frame of reference for things like justice. We start thinking, and we're trained to think of people who disagree with us as lesser people, or even worse, as less than people. We've dehumanized the concept of justice. And as a result, justice is at risk when it's in free fall like this. It's at risk of just becoming a tool for self-righteous point scoring. Self-righteous point scoring. The meaning of justice needs to be rehumanized if it's going to satisfy the call for justice that proceeds from every human heart. And we see from Anne Montgomery, and that's Zellweger's character's name, we see from Anne Montgomery's quote, what is missing? What is missing is some basis on which to understand the intrinsic value of human life, of humankind, of each individual. We're looking for an objective basis, a rational basis against which we can say all people are of equal and intrinsic worth, and therefore justice is a coherent concept. And you don't get to decide what it is, and I don't get to decide what it is, because it's out there. And we know how intrinsic worth operates. For intrinsic worth to be in anything, the source of that worth needs to come from outside of it, transcendentally. When we look at what God says about the intrinsic value of people, The God of the Bible tells us that we are all made in his image. It's the transcendent imputation of intrinsic value on all people, bringing the concept of justice back to life, rehumanizing it, rehumanizing the concept of justice with that simple but incredible truth that we're all made in God's image. So the rehumanizing of justice. Secondly, the reorienting of love. Now, lots has obviously been said about love over the years. Everyone's been writing about it, everyone's been singing about it, everyone's been thinking about it, we've been making movies about it. But even just the word, when we are in this kind of non-objective freefall, when everyone gets to decide for themselves, even the word and how we use it shows us that we don't fully appreciate what it actually is. I say I love my wife, and then I say I love peanut butter. So even in using it myself, I'm clearly using it in different contexts and in different ways, but we say love the whole time through. Shakespeare, in one of his sonnets, he writes that love is like a small child that seeks after everything that it can get. Love is like a small child that seeks after everything that it can get. An equally influential person, writing about love last year, Taylor Swift, she writes in one of her song lyrics, "Man, he's so obsessedly in love with me, and boy, I understand why." Which is really just a riff on Shakespeare, with a few more grammatical mistakes. What we see when we get to define love ourselves with no objective frame of reference is the same thing that we saw with justice. We turn in on ourselves. We curve in on ourselves. We become self-centric with what love is. And love becomes something about consumption, about validation, about affirmation, about me and my desires and what I feel and what I want and what I want to get. It becomes about me. Now, it's interesting. There was a Christian thinker back in the day called Martin Luther. And he has this impressive definition of what the Bible refers to as sin. I think it's the best definition of sin outside of the Bible. Luther says exactly that. He says sin is men and women curved in on themselves. Sin is men and women curved in on themselves. We see it when we try to define justice on our own terms, and we see it when we try to define love on our own terms. But when we look at what God has to say, we saw that God solved our problem when it came to restoring the concept of justice. Let's see what he has to say about love. And in the Bible, one of the authors of one of the books of the Bible writes this beautiful kind of depiction of all of the pillars of what love is. And it's what we hear in all of our weddings all of the time. Love is patient, love is kind. It's such a beautiful way to think about all of these characteristics of love that we know and that we like. But there's a couple of things tucked away in there that we often miss. Often we cut the reading there and then the wedding kind of rolls on. Love rejoices in truth, and love rejects evil. It rejoices in truth and it rejects evil. So straight away, this Taylor Swift definition of love automatically gets invalidated. Because if love is rejoicing in truth and it's rejecting evil, then it has to be discerning. It has to be exclusive on some level. It has to be judging and adjudicating on some level. It has to want what's best for its subject. That's what true love does. And we see this in the person of Jesus too in the Bible. From what he says and what he does. He says love has no greater one than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. And so we see now what love has lost when we try and define it on our own selfish terms. It's lost truth. It's lost sacrifice. It's lost that capacity to bind itself exclusively to what it wants the best for. And so straight away now, this love that Jesus is now talking about, this love that we see in the Bible, is not just quantitatively different to the love out there, it's qualitatively different. There's a story of the evangelist Billy Graham meeting with President Dwight Eisenhower. And the president says, "Billy, I wish you well on this next crusade. I hope it goes well. Wouldn't it be great if we all just learned to love each other again?" And Billy Graham said, "Yes, Mr. President, it would. But we can only love in the truest sense if our lives are first touched by the love of Jesus Christ. We can only love in the truest sense if our lives are first touched by the love of Jesus Christ." He's acknowledging and making the point that this love of God that can only come through Jesus is qualitatively different. And so for those of you who are Avengers fans, in the first Thor movie, where humankind is being introduced to Thor for the first time, so everyone's kind of confused and freaked out. He's got all these superpowers. No one knows who he is. And then he's fighting at the end of the movie against this alien invasion. right? And he's got a hammer, and his hammer is what Thor uses to channel his power, and he can like make lightning and do all kinds of other crazy stuff. And the authorities on Earth are really confused by all of this. And so you see them pulling up. The military's there, the SAS is there, the SEALs are there, and they pull out a megaphone and they look at his hammer and what he's doing with it, and they say, "Excuse me, sir, it looks like you're using unregistered weapons technology. It looks like you're using unregistered weapons technology." When you and I open our lives to the love of Jesus Christ, and then that pours out into the lives of other people, we are now working with unregistered love technology. It is love technology that the world has not seen. It doesn't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to the world. This is not just the kind of love that is nice to people or affectionate to people. This is the kind of love that Jesus showed himself when he was dying for you and me on that cross. This is the kind of love where Jesus is literally loving the people who are killing him while they are killing him. That's the brand of love. Qualitatively different love, not just quantitatively different love. So we need to rehumanize justice. We need to reorient love. Thirdly and finally, we need to reinvigorate happiness. We need to reinvigorate happiness. It forms such a big part of what we talk about as flourishing. And the great writer C.S. Lewis, he understands about happiness what many of us don't take the time to understand. He says, if happiness was all I was looking for, I would just need a good bottle of whiskey and a few friends. I tend to agree with him. I would probably add a bucket of fried chicken. Bucket of fried chicken, bottle of whiskey, and some good friends. And that would be happiness. The point he's making is that it's so short-sighted of us to reduce our entire purpose of being, to reduce our entire concept of flourishing down to this tiny little feeling called happiness that we can get from a decent hug or a bowl of ice cream or a nice movie. And what he's saying is that, do you think that's all God has for you? If you're sitting there now and you're thinking, this is all God has for me, happiness, the pursuit of happiness, is that it? But when we look at the Bible, that's not what we see. The Bible actually doesn't talk that much about happiness. It talks a lot about something else, joy. When you look in the dictionary as to what happiness means, it says a lot of stuff. One of the things it says is happiness is a component of joy. Then you go and look in that same dictionary about what joy means, and it says, well, joy is really made up of a whole lot of happiness. So these are self-referential definitions. The secular dictionary and the secular world doesn't understand the qualitative difference between happiness and joy. And once again, as we saw it with justice, as we saw it with love, what God offers in the context of happiness is not just quantitatively different to what the world offers. It's not just lots and lots and lots of happiness. It's qualitatively different. It's joy. And Christian joy is very different to man-made happiness. It's very different in at least two ways. Happiness is a feeling that is based on external stimuli, external environmental factors, things that happen to you. Good things, but things that happen to you. Christian joy is based on internal and eternal spiritual realities, the ultimate of which is being in a right relationship with God. That's what joy is. It's based on enduring internal spiritual realities, not temporary external physical realities. Secondly, man-made happiness, at least on some level, can be man-made. Right? You don't need to be a Christian to enjoy that whiskey and fried chicken. But joy cannot be man-made. Joy only comes through the indwelling of God in our hearts. And so we see that's an incredible thing. Happiness and joy are in completely different categories. They're qualitatively different. You feel happiness, but when Jesus is in your life, you are joy. You actually are. It's something that you ontologically are. And your happiness levels will continue to go up and down as the things around you continue to change. But your joy holds strong because it's anchored in something literally outside of this world. The rehumanizing of justice, the reorienting of love, and the reinvigoration of happiness to point us to joy. These ideals that the world has tried to take away from us by telling us that they don't actually mean anything, they mean whatever you want them to mean. We look at the heart of God and we see that they mean much more than that. But where does this leave us? We see that these ideals need to be restored, but it's still tough out there. It's still unstable. The world, as the economists are telling us, is VUCA, V-U-C-A. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. So where do we turn for all of this? Well, we come to the second meaning of Ariel. I said Ariel meant Jerusalem. It also means lion of God. Lion or lioness of God. And as a Christian, as a political advisor, I often used to think, well, this is a pretty big responsibility. Am I being called to be a lion of God? That's kind of intense. And then I looked in the Bible, and the answer was no. We're actually pointed to the ultimate lion of God. In the very last book of the Bible, in the 5th verse of the 5th chapter, it says, "Weep not, behold, the Lion of Judah has conquered." It's talking about Jesus. He's the Lion of God. He's not just the standard and the rational basis for and the explanation for these ideals that pour out of our heart, justice and love and happiness and joy. He's not just the standard for those things, he's the means to achieve those things as well. For you and for me. And so if you are sick and tired of being sick and tired of looking for flourishing in your own strength, in this marketplace of ideas that's been undermined by this battlefield of ideals, and you feel lost, you feel like you're in orbit out there as well with these ideas that have been taken out of our hearts and diluted and drained of their meaning, God is saying to you, if you come back to me, you open your heart and open your mind to me, I want to come and live inside of you. I want to be with you and offer you all of these things that your heart has been desiring. He's not just the standard of justice, the standard of love, and the standard of joy. He's the means to justice, the means to love, and the means to joy. And straight away we see something else that's where this qualitative-quantitative dynamic comes back into play. We think that building Jerusalem is something that happens out there. And God says to us, look, yes, there is going to be a new Jerusalem. You leave that to me, though. In the meantime, you focus on building towards Jerusalem, and that begins in here. Begins in the hearts and minds of you and me and everyone else out there. Perfect love, perfect justice, and perfect joy. It's on offer for every single one of us. The question for you and me is, what are we going to do with God's offer of those things? It comes to us free through grace, through an up-close and personal relationship with Jesus Christ. What's your response to that offer of relationship? He's reaching out to you right here, right now. Wants to restore these ideals to your mind and wants to restore flourishing to your heart in and through him.